All right, welcome everybody. My name is Mrs. Rafferty. Today we are going to be listening to the story My Garden by Kevin Henkes. We are going to be talking about a couple of different things as we read it. And then at the end, you are going to need a piece of paper, some markers or crayons, something to draw with. So I would like you now to pause the video so you can go get paper and something to draw with. And then when you come back, we're going to read our story and we are going to go over character, setting, and events in the story. All right, so now that you have your paper and your crayons or markers, whatever you need to color with, we are going to read the story My Garden by Kevin Henkes. So we know that My Garden is the title of the story, and Kevin Henkes is the author, which means he wrote the words. He is also the illustrator, which means that he drew the pictures. Here's our table of contents page. My Garden begins on page 4. It is a fiction story, which means it's not real, it's made up, by Kevin Henkes. There is a paired reader to the story that begins on page 31, and it is poetry about plants. My Garden. So we're going to take a look at the characters. We're also going to pause and take a look at the setting. We know that a setting is where a story takes place, and then we are going to discuss the events in the story. So everything that happened in the story as we read through it. My mother has a garden. I'm her helper. I water, I weed, and I chase away the rabbits so that they don't eat all the lettuce. It's hard work, and my mother's garden is very nice. But if I had a garden. So we can identify two parts of our story already. The characters are going to be her mother and the little girl, and the setting is where the story takes place. So we can tell that this story is going to take place in a garden. We see the garden in the story. We see she has her hose with water coming out of it. Mom has a shovel. There are some bunnies running around. So that is where the setting is, where the story takes place. There would be no weeds, and the flowers would keep blooming and never die. So here we have her in her garden again. There's our character, the little girl. We don't have a name for her. I do not believe there is a name for her throughout the story, so we're just going to refer to her as the little girl. And the setting again is her garden. And here you see her in her garden with all of the flowers running around. In my garden, the flowers could change color just by me thinking about it. Pink, blue, green, purple, even patterns. So here's one of the events in the story. She's thinking about what her garden would look like and be like in her imagination. So one of the events in the story is that instead of having regular flowers that grow their normal colors, she's going to change it and they're going to grow different colors. So here she has a sunflower. So we know that sunflowers are yellow and black. And in her imagination, her sunflowers are growing with patterns on them. So that is one event in the story. There are patterns in her garden. And if you picked a flower, another one would grow right back. So here's another event that happens in the story. She picks all of her flowers, and within a couple of seconds, the flowers grow right back after they pick them. So we know that that's not true, and that this is a fiction story, so it's made up, because flowers take many weeks to grow. And if you cut them, they have to grow back up. They need water, they need sun, and they need good soil or dirt to grow. So there's another event in the story. She wants her flowers to always grow fast in her garden. In my garden, the rabbits would eat the lettuce because the rabbits would be chocolate and I would eat them. So here's another example of a setting in our story. She wants all of her rabbits to grow but not be real rabbits. She wants them to grow as chocolate. We know you can't really grow chocolate bunnies out of the ground. If I planted seashells, I'd grow seashells. So here she is. Our character is the little girl. The setting is still in her garden, but right now we're in her imagination as well. And another event in the story is that she would want her garden to grow seashells instead of flowers. If I planted jelly beans, I'd grow a great big jelly bean bush. So here she has another event in our story. Instead of growing a regular bush that's green, she's growing a big bush that has jelly beans on it. Sometimes in my garden, Good unusual things would just pop up. Buttons and umbrellas and rusty old keys. So in her imagination, she's pretending that her garden is getting watered, but instead of growing flowers, it's growing buttons and keys and umbrellas. Now, I've never seen an umbrella grow out of the ground, but she's using her imagination because this is a fiction story. We know it's make-believe. In my garden, there would be birds and butterflies by the hundreds, so that the air was humming with wings. So this part of the story could be true or could be made up, because in real life, we know there's lots of birds and butterflies and hummingbirds around. And if you ever go to a butterfly garden, they have hundreds of butterflies flying around. So this could technically be a real event in the story, but it's also made up in her mind because she wants hundreds of birds flying around everywhere. The tomatoes would be as big as beach balls, and the carrots would be invisible, because I don't like carrots. So here she's imagining she's growing giant tomatoes, but no no carrots, because her carrots are invisible. She doesn't like carrots. At night, the morning glories would stay open, shining like stars, and the strawberries would glow like lanterns. So here she's using her imagination. The settings changed a little bit. So it's not in the garden during the day now. Now it's at night in her garden. You can take a look at the illustrations. You see her moon, but the flowers are glowing, and so are the strawberries right now. It's night now. Only the fireflies and the porch light are glowing. Before bed, I take one seashell from the shelf in my room, and I go to the garden. I poke the seashell into the ground. Who knows what might happen next? I cover it up with dirt, and I pat it down with my foot. So here she is. This is the last event in the story. She's going to try and grow her seashell in the dirt. So we know it's nighttime because we can see the moon in the background, and there are fireflies dancing around. And she's deep into her garden. She's trying to grow that seashell. What are you doing? Asked my mother. Oh, nothing, I say. Just working in the garden. So here's her mom coming to get her. We know her mother is another character in this story along with her. And here she is, the last page of our story. There's that seashell, and we're imagining that it is sprouting some roots to grow up. So now I want you to pause the video, and I want you to get your markers and your paper ready, and I'm going to switch my cameras around so that you guys can see what I'm doing. Okay, so now that we just read that story, My Garden, we have our piece of paper, and we have our markers. So what we're going to do is we are going to talk about we're going to draw the setting, we're going to draw a couple of the events, and we are going to draw the characters. So we know that the character was a little girl. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to draw that little girl. She was our main character in our story, so I'm going to draw her right in the middle. There's her face. I think she had on a pink, we're going to give her a pink dress. Some arms. Some eyes. I like to make things colorful. Of course, some eyelashes. And her nose. Big happy mouth. I'm going to give her some blonde hair, just like she was in our story. So I'm not going to give her any bangs or anything, because I'm actually going to draw her a hat at the top, because she had that big floppy hat on. So here's her hat. If you want to color it in, you can. Just like that. I've got to give her some legs, too. Alright. Now remember, Mrs. Rafferty cannot draw very well, but I am trying my best, and that is all that matters. So our character in the story was the little girl. The next thing is our setting. Where did the story take place? So we're going to have to draw our garden. So what I'm going to do is lots of gardens have grass and weeds. So I'm just going to draw a bunch of green at the bottom. And next I'm going to take some more markers, and I'm going to draw my flowers. some flowers in her garden. Oh, I'm going to move that over a little bit. Sorry. And, oops, dropped the marker now. That's okay. Some tulips, maybe. Another tulip over here. Okay, and then I got to draw the stems to my flowers because that's how the flowers grow up out of the ground. Just like this. So there's her garden. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my marker or my pen and we want to label it. So I'm going to label her on her dress. I'm going to put the little girl. So I'm just going to write girl because we don't know what her name is. Here we're going to label this down here, her garden. Because this is a very important part of the setting. She's in her garden. So now the events in our story. So we know that she was using her imagination. She was using make-believe to draw some of the things in this story or think about what she wanted. So what I'm going to do at the top is I'm going to draw some thought bubbles. And those are where we're going to draw the things that she imagined in the garden. Oops, sorry. So I have one thought bubble here, and I'm going to draw a big circle. And if you remember, something that she wanted to have in her garden were chocolate bunnies. So I'm going to draw those chocolate bunnies. Oh boy. This is where I cannot draw very well. So we're going to draw our floppy ears. Big floppy ears. Looks like a mouse. Nothing I can do about it. And the face. And then I'm going to label that. The bunnies. Okay, next we know that she wanted some seashells. She wanted to try and grow some seashells. That was one of the events at the end of the story. So here I'm going to draw some seashells. I'm going to draw like a clamshell. It has like different parts. I really don't know how to draw a conch shell, which is that one that she kind of drew in the ground, planted in the ground. But I'm trying my best here. And draw another clamshell. And then, of course, we have to label our shells. Okay. And then we're going to draw two more thought bubbles over here. And if you remember correctly, she wanted to have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of butterflies and birds. So we're going to draw some butterflies. We're going to draw some birds. Butterflies I can draw. If you want to get creative and put patterns or anything in it, you can. I'm going to draw some birds. Mrs. Raffi cannot draw birds very well, so she just draws them just like this, like they're flying in the sky. And of course, we're going to label it. We're going to write birds. And we're going to, you know what, I'm going to turn my paper. I'm going to write butterfly right in the middle of the butterfly, so we know that that is a butterfly. Just like that. Okay. And then the last thing we're going to draw for one of our thought bubbles is, remember, she wanted big, giant tomatoes. So we have to draw a big, giant tomato. Just like this. There's my big, giant tomato. Give it a little stem at the top. There's my tomato. And one of the events in the story that we really found interesting was that she wanted invisible carrots. So if it's invisible, we can't draw anything, but we can label it so that if anybody looks at your picture and goes, "Why do you have carrots here?" then you can think back in your story and go, "Well, the little girl in the story really wanted to grow invisible carrots because she didn't like carrots." So this is one way to show that you understand the story, the characters, the setting, and the events. So we used one piece of paper for this. We drew our little girl, who was our main character. We drew the setting, which was her garden, and then we drew some of the events in the story. She wanted to grow chocolate bunnies out of the ground. She wanted to grow shells, seashells. She wanted to have lots of butterflies and birds. She wanted to grow a giant tomato and invisible carrots. So all of these thought bubbles are just her imagination, because we know that we really cannot grow chocolate bunnies or seashells, invisible carrots, giant tomatoes. And you can't have hundreds and hundreds of birds and butterflies, but you can have some. And that is how we use paper and our pencils and our thoughts to understand the characters, the setting, and the events in the story. We'll see everybody next time.